Hello and welcome back to the S14 build. When I first bought this car, even though it barely ran, the goal has always been to get to the track, and today we finally do it. As always, there's a little bit of everything and a really big announcement at the end, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, let's get into it. I wanted to leave this car on its cheap Taiwan coilovers, old tires, and DIY alignment for its first track day, so in future videos I could showcase how the upgrades improve the car and progress along with my driving. That being said, I still made sure to tackle some basic maintenance items like the oil, proper brake fluid, and a few other issues that had been bugging me. Now, this car is full of surprises, and even changing the oil had me scratching my head. The level on the dipstick appeared way too high well before I added the recommended amount of oil. After looking around, I noticed the oil pan actually has a little bit of a dent, likely from the Stance Nation days of this car, and I imagine this is reducing capacity. I didn't want to overfill it though, so I went to the top range on the dipstick and brought some extra oil along with me. The brakes on this car have never felt great, and I still haven't figured it all out. I think one of the issues is the balance between the front and the rear. This car has a 4-piston Z32 brake setup on the front, and the rears are still stock with the stock master cylinder. If you know all the specs such as piston, rotor diameter, pad width, and more, you can calculate the brake bias. In this car, I got a 78% front bias. Manufacturers often make cars with some front brake bias, so when you lock up the brakes, it's more stable than if the rears were to lock up. But for the track, this means a longer braking distance. This issue was further accentuated because the more aggressive brake pads I ordered for the track arrived for the front brakes, but not the rear, so that's going to be one of my many excuses. I was actually feeling pretty prepared until 3 days before the track session when I noticed a small leak from the rear. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a pinhole in a rusty brake line right by the end of the vent hose for the diff. This line runs between the two wheels and it was a pain to remove. I'm not sure why it was so seized on and thought for sure I wouldn't be able to reuse any of the fittings by the time we cranked them off. With so little time, I picked up a pre-made length of 5-foot brake line from Canadian Tire and fed it through. I had a bit of experience from setting up the brake lines in our Chevy Apache build, and I think that helped with feeding the line through the rear subframe. I played it safe with this line, so it isn't the prettiest, but it should do the job. I bled the system and tested, but the pedal felt much lower. I wasn't convinced the rear brakes were doing anything at all. I've never said up and down so much in my life trying to bleed all the air out. In the end, I realized enough brake fluid had leaked out when I removed the line that air had gotten into the master. I finally clued in and used the bleeder screw on the master which leads to the rear line, and after a few more pumps, everything was back to normal. I went out for a final test drive and heard a loud pop as I left the garage. I feared the worst, but this time it wasn't my car, but a super unlucky toad. Anyways, the car felt good, and I got packed up with as many tools as I could fit. In contrast, my friend and his M235i brought nothing at all. The other prep I did was lots of sim racing. I actually found the track I was going to, Toronto Motorsports Park, on Assetto Corsa and ran an absurd amount of laps. I'd say I'm a pretty solid sim racer, but I'm not convinced this paid off. The track was created using a satellite image from Google Maps, but once I got to the track in real life, there were some really noticeable differences which took me a long time to adjust for, so that's excuse number 2. Finally, I watched a great tutorial of the track by Michael Gardner. I'll leave a link to his channel below. I chose to go to a shorter evening session as I more wanted to break the car in and make sure everything worked. The event was really well organized, everyone was super friendly, and all the drivers were really respectful. Unfortunately, it was really cold and a storm passed by right before we started, flooding large portions of the track. To rub it in, there were a lot of modern all-wheel drive cars with traction control who fared a lot better in the wet. It was mainly Golf Rs, Focus RS, and my friend's 235i X-Drive. We did our sighting lap at 60% speed, and I was shocked how much I was already drifting around. On the first real lap, the car in front of me spun off track, which kinda freaked me out. I played it super safe and decided to pull into the pits after a few laps to check everything was okay. I parked and started casually chatting to the guy beside me when he noticed my front brakes were starting to smoke. I guess when I had parked, they stuck on. I hopped in and drove around to cool them down some more, but I think this might have boiled the fluid a bit and introduced some air bubbles. Maybe it's all in my head, but in the next session, my pedal felt lower and it was far from confidence inspiring. Without ABS, I definitely struggled with modulating the brakes at times, especially while downshifting. My biggest issue was not placing my foot close enough to the edge of the brake pedal, which would allow me to heel toe. So I'd have to briefly lift and slide it closer to the gas pedal in a braking zone. Definitely not ideal. Now that I've made countless excuses, it's no surprise to announce my times weren't that great, or close to it. Before the event, I thought a 1:30 would be a good time, although that may have been wishful thinking, especially with the rain and my driving. I started the day around a 1:55, and by the end the best I ran was a 1:40. For context, my friend in the 400 horsepower automatic M235i X-Drive ran a 1:31. I'm curious what I would have run the dry, but I definitely learned a ton and see so much I can improve on. Watching back the footage, I can see I'm often turning in way too late and just playing it a bit too safe, especially with my braking and corner exit acceleration. Despite my lack of empirical success, I had a really great time and was excited to come back soon with some upgrades to the car. But this may be the last time I drive this car. I really didn't think I'd ever sell it, but I had an unexpected opportunity pop up, and I took it. Sounds crazy, but I'll try to justify the decision in the next video. I'm super excited to share that car with the channel and explain what's next. All I can say now is that we're definitely going to be going faster. Subscribe to the channel so you can see the new car and more. Thanks for watching.